about to start our meeting. And Madam President, say the first, dear members of the OSCE Parliamentary Assembly, dear distinguished guests. So we are very, very welcome, really very, very happy to welcome you at this event today. And before actually starting with this, with the content part, I would like to make some technical points. The one is please note that this meeting is being recorded and broadcasted live on the OSCE PA's social media platforms. Secondly, I kindly ask all participants to mute their microphones when not speaking. And likewise, please unmute your microphones only when given the floor. And please note that requests to take the floor or ask questions should be written in the webinar's chat. So, dear friends, dear colleagues, our today's meeting will be focused on the topic of future generations. Sometimes as politicians, we can also be visionary. So I'm very happy that we have this topic. And let me welcome you once again at our event that we organized today with Vice President Askar Shakirov, who is also the Assembly's Special Representative on Sustainable Development Goals. Our Assembly in recent years was very vocal and responsive towards the emerging present-day crisis in the region and globally. Whether it was pandemic, energy shortages, violation of human rights and democratic principles, or unlawful and grave war started by Russian Federation in Ukraine. What is also important is to understand and recognize what terrible consequences all these crises have for the people now, but also will create for the people that are not even born. And that is something that we will focus on today. Future generations whose welfare or very survival may be compromised by climate change and pollution, backsliding of democracy and human rights, or the armed conflicts are not present in decision-making. Majority of this crisis and issues could be linked to long-term drivers, that were evident, but ignored in the past and would still affect the future. We, of course, cannot fully predict every single crisis, but understanding the foundation of causes of these issues can be a key to addressing and preventing them. The interests of present and future generations are aligned, but current decision makers, like us, should place themselves in the position of future generations to seek for sustainable solutions. Parliamentarians, governments, and public institutions need to ensure that their decision-making is not compromising needs and interests of future generations. We need to develop multilateral solutions for a better tomorrow, strengthening global governance, and modernize our institutions for both present and future. So, and for this all to do, are the young people really very, very key. So they can play an important role in this transformation process. Youth should not actually bear the burden of addressing alone the problems that we created in the past and keep creating in the present. We will have a chance today to hear from very interesting speakers and learn about various aspects of the work related to future generations, including the preparations of the United Nations Declaration on Future Generations, interlinkages with UN Sustainable Development Goals, modernization of institutions, and the role of young people. And I hope that our today's event will result in a very fruitful discussion on how we parliamentarians, and especially Parliamentary Assembly of the OSCE, together with young people, can commit to take future generations into account and increase our efforts to achieve peace, sustainability, human rights, fairness, and equality today and for the interest of future. So with just to give you a short flavor of what to expect today. So we will have some few welcoming speeches, and then after that we will listen to Ambassador Jörg Brandt joining us from New York. I will introduce her in a second. And we have also three very special and very interesting speakers for our panel discussions. So I will introduce themselves too, and then we will actually continue to have an open debate, which I hope will actually stimulate us to find really ideas how to deal with this topic in our assembly. So without further ado, I would like now to pass the floor to event, my dear colleague, Special Representative on SDGs, Mr. Askar Shakirov. Dear Mr. Shakirov, floor is yours.
Thank you, Madam Farah Karimi, dear President Margareta Sederfeld, dear Secretary General Roberto Montella, dear colleagues. As Special Representative on Sustainable Development Goals, I would like to welcome you to our webinar and thank you for taking time to contribute to very important discussions on the development of a comprehensive vision for future generations and the role of parliamentary dimension. The 17 SDGs chart the course for a brighter, fairer, and more prosperous future for all. In a way similar to the OSCE comprehensive concept of security, they address all three components of sustainable development: economic, social, and environmental. A core element of the 2030 agenda is the assurance that no one will be left behind, which means that people, in particular the youth, must be included at every stage from initial policy design to implementation and monitoring. This is the decade of action toward the SDGs, toward achieving the SDGs, and we have 7 years left to achieve them. Due to global crisis, progress has slowed. We've been stagnating, at worst regressing. This is especially true in cities all over the world, where populations are rapidly increasing. We urgently need to take action on the SDGs and get them on track. One of the ways we can do that is to put an improved focus on real, meaningful youth engagement in governance and decision-making. Provided with the necessary skills and opportunities needed to reach their potential, young people can be a driving force for supporting development and contributing to peace and security. Youth-led organizations need to be encouraged and empowered to participate in translating the 2030 agenda into local, national, and regional policy. They play a significant role in the implementation, monitoring, and review of the agenda, as well as in holding governments accountable. With political commitment and adequate resources, young people have the potential to make the most effective transformation of the world into a better place for all. Without the inclusion of the youth, the world cannot face current challenges, from addressing the climate crisis and mitigating its impacts to achieving equal opportunities and changing consumption and production patterns. In this regard, the initiative to adopt at the UN level a declaration on future generations is extremely relevant. I am honored to contribute to an establishment of a platform in OSCE to work on this topic today with Madame Farah Karimi, Special Representative for Youth Engagement. Today's meeting aims to provide a multi-stakeholder exchange on how OSCE platform can best participate in the global effort to implement the sustainable development goals by and for future generations. Our General Committee on Economic Affairs, Science, Technology, and the Environment is a key tool that we use in the Parliamentary Assembly in order to strengthen the implementation of the SDGs, along with the work of the special representatives for gender equality and youth engagement. Nonetheless, the SDGs are also widespread across most of the initiatives and dimensions that the OSCE Parliamentary Assembly engages on. Our webinar last year on implementing the UN Sustainable Development Goals took a close look at the link between addressing the impacts of current challenges and how the fight for the SDGs was embedded in those efforts through discussions with key partners such as the World Health Organization and the UN Development Programme. In line with the outcomes of these discussions, our 2022 Birmingham's resolution on implementing the SDGs in the OSCE area was applauding the remarkable commitment of youth in OSCE participating states to inclusive solutions to global and regional challenges, including climate change and their leadership in mitigating the impact of the COVID-19 pandemic. Moreover, it emphasized that building a better future requires a renewed commitment to the SDGs, with parliaments playing a vital role in the long-term mission. To build more sustainable societies, we need to integrate socio-economic, environmental, and new technology governance in a longer-term perspective than we have done so far. We must not only think beyond the 2030 agenda, we must also implement guiding pillars that will ensure forward-looking visions on how we choose to live and interact with the world around us. I believe that the concept of future generations is an extremely relevant and vital framework for this purpose, as it establishes a space-time spectrum that safeguards and appeals to the long-term perspective. Dear colleagues, I hope the discussions in this webinar will inspire the declarations in Vancouver, and foremost, I hope it will inspire our current and future leaders. It is urgent to redouble our efforts to leave a better world for future generations, and to do so, let's ensure the voice of the youth and future generations in our institutions. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you very much. Thank you, dear colleague. I think it is really very important to emphasize this interlinkage between SDGs for current generations and for the future generations. So thank you very much for your remarks. Now I would like to invite our dear President, Madam, to address actually this meeting. Dear Margareta, you being here actually shows again your really commitment, high commitment to young people, to engagement of youth, but especially on really inspiring the lawmakers, the parliamentarians to take initiative, to be active on a very, very important topic like future generations. So please, floor is yours.
Thank you very much, dear Farah, and thank you as well, Vice President Aska Shakira, for taking part in this meeting. And most of all, thank you to both of you for accepting to be appointed as Special Representative Farah Karimi on youth, and Vice President Aska Shakira on the Agenda 2030 and the SDGs. I see it as very important, but also it's a true pleasure to meet with all of you. Secretary General, welcome to the meeting, and also dear colleagues and speakers, thank you for taking part here. And I would also like to say thank you for joining today's meeting. I think it's one of a very important issue for our future. And when it's a combination of young parliamentarians and environment, it shows that there is a connection between the two subjects, but also the importance of working with this perspective inside OSCE Parliamentary Assembly. And I think that today's discussions, it gives us also a rare opportunity to think and reflect in long-term perspective. It's something that it's very rare in politics, actually. As politicians, we are used to think about today's problem, what's happened today, maybe what will be the effect of today for tomorrow. But I'm convinced that we as parliamentarians, we need to think a little bit further on than tomorrow or next year, or not only the 100 year in future. But I'm not saying that this is easy. I am not saying that we are predicting correct. There is a lot of examples in the history where we could see that political or research prediction was not adequate at all. And my favorite example is actually from when I was a young person in school. And my teacher in mathematics told us that the counter to use to count mathematics, it will be no use for the future. No, it's not, because we have the IT system, but that was not what he had in his mind. It was paper and a pen. So it's not easy to predict what will be the future. But let me also add, if we are not discussing about the future, how should we find any kind of solution? And where should we find a basis to meet? I think the discussion is a very important tool. And of course, when it's about the future and the challenge, it's even more important to keep the dialogue and exchange views. And as mentioned here earlier, of course, there is a lot of crises and challenges, not only on the national level, also inside the OSCE region. Let me just mention, it's war, armed conflicts, war in Ukraine. Russia's war in Ukraine is one of the main topics, but it's also the Taliban takeover in Afghanistan. The development we could see in Iran, it's our neighborhood, but it affects our region. I would also say the impact of climate change. We could see it up in the north where the ice is melting, in the south where it gets hotter and hotter, how I could see in my country, and I know this is for all northern countries, the snow is less, but also how the wind, we have more storms all over the world, and rain is less common. What kind of impact will this have on the future? But also the health crisis, as was mentioned here, with COVID, but there is also a lot of other health problems that we could see are referring to changing our environment. And the food shortage, what does this mean? What can we do as politicians to secure the food for the future? Energy, what can we do to secure energy? Without energy, how should we be able to continue the lifestyle we have today? And not mention the financial crisis, where we could see how rents are going up, inflation is increasing. There is a lot, but we as politicians, we can discuss. We can also put efforts and resources in research, in education. That's a good step forward, but we can do much more than this. And talking about different generations, I must say that we have to talk between generations, both those of us who are a bit elder, those who are young, and those who are middle-aged. And I'm sure that we can find a pathway forward together. Maybe it's not easy. We have different experience, different hope for the future, and different thoughts. But I am sure there is always a pathway forward. And talking about long-term challenges, I think there are not an easy answer, not an easy at all, but we have to face it, we have to reflect, and we have to move forward. And for this, we can systematically rely on the Sustainable Development Goals, the SDGs, which provide a wide and comprehensive framework to tackle global changes. And we need to fully integrate the SDGs in our responses, in our duties, and the work we do as lawmakers, but also what we do here on the bilateral, multilateral arena. And I am very glad to see that many countries have already begun a process to recognize the rights of future generations and also to implement the SDGs in the work and the laws. And I hope that all these efforts can generate sufficient political will to agree on the UN Declaration on Future Generations. Such a political document would be instrumental in committing our international community to reform and modernize institutions to protect future generations. And discussions leading up to such a document should be as inclusive as possible. On this note, let me commend the efforts of the permanent mission of Netherlands, Ms. Farah Karimi's country, to the United Nations, which is co-facilitating the preparatory process with the permanent mission of Fiji. Within this context, it is important that discussions about future generations also take place within the OSCE Parliamentary Assembly. And I am pleased that it has done so for a long time now. And I could see that there is a will and interest to continue with this network and discussions. And I would like to thank once again Vice President Shakirov, who is also Special Representative on the Agenda 2030, and Ms. Farah Karimi, who is the Vice Chair on the Third Committee and Special Representative on Youth, for their work and their efforts for today's webinar, as I see, is very important. And I do also hope that you will continue with this challenge, because it's important to not only hold this webinar as a single meeting, continue the efforts, because that can make the difference. And as I said, the implementation of the SDGs is a crucial starting point for creating a safe and peaceful world for future generations. Tomorrow, the younger generation will inherit our planet and will hand it down to the next generation. And these are the cross-dimensional issues of universal importance. They touch on all arenas of the OSCE and our Parliamentarian Assembly, from ensuring peace and stability to addressing the climate crisis to promote prosperous and democratic societies. And today's meeting, with a great panel of guest speakers and also all participants here, I look forward to today's discussions and insightful ideas and exchange of views, because, as I said, that's the fundament that OSCE is built on, and that's also the way I can see forward. And I wish all of you a productive debate today, and good luck, and I will follow the discussion today. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you, dear Margareta. You really mentioned a lot of topics that we will discuss today. And the next on my list is Ambassador Joka Brandt, and she is the permanent representative of the Kingdom of the Netherlands to the United Nations, and as already Margareta said, leading the intergovernmental actually process with, I think last year Fiji and this year with Jamaica together towards the future summit, which will take place in, I think, 2024, and also on the declaration on future generations. And I know Joka for a long time, and I think the world couldn't have a better leader on this topic than you. So floor is yours, dear Joka.
Thank you very much. Farah, and good morning, good afternoon, or good evening, wherever you are. And thank you for the invitation to participate in this webinar. And let me start by welcoming this initiative. I think it's great to see that the OSCE Parliamentary Assembly has put the issue of future generations so solidly on its agenda, and it's of course wonderful to see the President Cederfeld, Vice President Shakirov, and also Secretary General Montella joining us for the discussion this morning or afternoon or wherever you are, because it's such an important issue for governments, for parliaments, for civil society, for academia, for young people, as many of you have already pointed out. Now, I was invited to bring in a little bit of the UN perspective and to get into the process to come to a UN declaration on future generations. So what I'd like to do is first to give a little bit of background and context, and then update you on the process, on where we are to date, and then maybe share some initial thoughts about what a declaration of future generation could bring. And for that, I'm also really looking forward to the discussion with the excellent panel of experts later on. So the whole process for this basically started in 2020 when we were celebrating the 75th anniversary of the United Nations, and then member states requested the Secretary General to prepare a report that was to provide a vision on global challenges, as well as recommendations on how best to address these challenges, basically also with the question whether the multilateral system was actually fit for purpose to deal with these challenges. And I don't need to repeat them because many of you have already stated the challenges that we're facing today. And I think it's fair to say that since 2020, when this request came, the challenges have not become less, but more urgent. So the report that the Secretary General drafted was entitled Our Common Agenda, and was presented in September 2022. And then in the first quarter of last year, there were extensive discussions on the report with member states. And I think during these discussions, it became clear that the UN Declaration on Future Generations could be a really important part of this process to implement our common agenda. And I think it's clear that a declaration should help us to think and act for those who are currently not represented in decision-making processes, while they will inherit the planet and the society from us. And I think it was also a call, and I think the President also referred to that, it was a call from the Secretary General to move away from what he calls short-termism and to take more long-term and intergenerational perspective into our thinking. And as you rightly said, Madam President, it's a really important role for politicians and parliamentarians to play here. So in June last year, the Kingdom of the Netherlands with Fiji were appointed to lead this process to get to a declaration on future generation. It was June, and we did not have much time, and most of the work had to be done over summer. So we then opted to produce what we called an elements paper for the declaration on future generation that was based on informal consultations with and written inputs that we got both from member states as well as from other stakeholders. And I think we see this process last year as a sort of brainstorm exercise to help, develop our thinking around the topic. The paper was therefore not the outcome of a process of negotiations, but can be seen as an important element for the follow-up that then again the Kingdom of the Netherlands and Fiji were requested to lead on the follow-up as well. And as you just said, Farah, last month Jamaica has replaced Fiji as our partner for this process. Now, let me just give you a little bit of an update on how we see this process. I think it's important to note that within the UN context, obviously this is very much seen as a member state driven process, but I cannot but agree fully with what the president also just said, that we need to have an inclusive process because the input and contributions of other stakeholders is crucial. I mean, we cannot do this by, only having inputs from member states. Now, on the UN side, the process is led by the Under-Secretary General for Policy, Guy Ryder. You may have heard his name, and we also work very closely with the President of the General Assembly and his team. So basically, when we look at the process where we are now, there is 3 elements to it. First, in the beginning of March, Secretary General Guterres shared his policy brief on this issue. The policy brief is called "To Think and Act for Future Generations," and basically outlines his views on what we as the international community can do to basically strengthen and implement our commitments to future generations. So that's an important input to the process. Secondly, what we decided to do is to set up a series of 3 dialogues with UN member states and observers, again, with a view to expand the common knowledge base through informal engagement with experts in the field of safeguarding the interests of future generations. And we do that because the topic is new in the UN in a sense that it is not a permanent agenda item for any existing UN body. So we're right in the middle of this process of dialogues. The first one was organized on the 14th of March, and that focused on sharing existing practices at local and national level that are already taking into account the interests of future generations in policy and decision making. So it was very important to basically share that knowledge with member states. Our second dialogue is actually today, and that will provide an opportunity to discuss the SG's policy brief. And our third dialogue is planned for the 11th of April. And that last dialogue will focus on engaging with youth representatives who have a background on working in future generations. And I think I agree with previous speakers that it's really important, that we include youth, young people in decision-making processes, but it should also be clear that they should not bear the responsibility to represent future generations and take the burden of that. I mean, if you're, for the sake of transparency, all these dialogues are recorded and can be followed online through a live stream. And if you'd like to look at it, they can also be looked at a later time. Then after the dialogue, so the last one is on the 11th of April, we will get into a process of engaging member states and external stakeholders on the declaration itself, what it could possibly look like. So we do that by both consulting member states individually and in groups and other stakeholders, and then eventually we will have the discussions and the proper negotiations with the entire membership. Well, what do we think a declaration could achieve? As I said, the commitment to future generations is now not a permanent agenda item at any of the UN bodies, but also the Secretary General's policy brief clearly shows that this commitment to future generations is not new. As a matter of fact, if you really go back all the way to the Charter, I think the first sentence actually reads that, we want to save succeeding generations from the scourge of war. So it's actually enshrined in the UN Charter, this commitment to and this responsibility for future generations. There has also been a declaration of responsibilities towards future generations in 1997. That process was then led by UNESCO. And, also there are many references to the interests of future generations in international and in national agreements. So we hope that, the current declaration will help us to bring together this work at different levels, international, national, local level, different institutions, and then help, build this base that is basically building on good practices. And secondly, of course, we want that declaration to really, again, present a commitment to take future generations better into account in policy and decision making. But I think importantly, we also need to come up with concrete proposals to implement that commitment, because the commitment in itself is not new. But I mean, basically, we need to move from words to action now. And I think, as the president also just stated, and it is really important that we have the political will and support to actually move from words to actions. And then maybe finally, and I think the Vice President also talked about that, there's been a lot of questions on how this declaration relates to the 2030 agenda. And I think the Vice President really elaborated on that. We strongly believe that the declaration that commits us to taking the interest of future generations into account is actually essential for the achievement of the SDGs, as again, it will help us focus on the implications, long-term implications of our policies and decisions. And we therefore feel it should be an important element of the SDG summit that will take place in September this year. And also the Summit of the Future was mentioned, I think, by you, Farah. Obviously that takes place in September 2024, but we feel that we need to do the work on the declaration now, also to prevent that when we have the Summit of the Future in September 2024, the interests of future generations come as a kind of afterthought. I think we need to have the declaration now so that the discussions on the summit will be informed by this declaration and the importance of focusing on future generations. So again, thanks very much for this opportunity. We really value, as I said, the engagement with a wide range of stakeholders in this process, including civil society, youth, academia, and of course also legislators and parliamentarians like yourself. So we really look forward to the discussion today, and we hope we can count on your continued engagement during this process. As I said, we have our second dialogue this morning, so I will have to log off at some point in time to go to the UN for this dialogue, but my colleagues will be here to follow the discussion. Thank you very much, Farah.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much. Ambassador Brunt and dear Yoko. I think really now we have a good overview of the process, and you elaborated on that. And I am really, again, congratulations also to your leadership on this process, because it is really important to have strong leadership on this matter. So could you maybe also give your, just elaborate on at what time do you think in this process there will be really the adoption of the declaration? So is it the September 2023, or what do you think about that?
Well, I mean, we haven't sort of finalized our roadmap for the process yet, because we are going to go into these discussions with member states and stakeholders after the 3 dialogues. But obviously, what we're aiming at is to have a product by September this year. I mean, we're kind of. The important thing, I think, is that we have a product to feed into the discussions on the SDGs at the summit and into the summit of the future. So that, like I said, it doesn't come as an afterthought, but of course we'll have to get agreement from the rest of the membership on the exact timeline. But this is what we are currently aiming for.
Mm-hmm. And on actually on the content part, so our region, the OSCE region, is the region which is now really, facing a huge challenge, of course, with this war going on. So what kind of challenges do you see in getting agreement on the declaration, and is there something also specific to this region that you could talk about it?
Well, I mean, I think that on the positive side, I think that the large majority of the membership is convinced of the importance of this topic. I mean, also if we look at the future, of course, most of the future generations will be born, outside the sort of Western Europe and America's part of the world. So there's a huge interest also from the developing world, because that's where most of the future generations will be born. I think that what we would like to avoid with the declaration is to get into a very complicated process, of political discussions. But like I said, we have work that we can build on. Everybody is committed to the charter that in itself commits to future generations. There's been countless references. So we would really like to see a declaration that kind of gives, as you may call it, hands and feet to this commitment, and will help us, move processes forward without focusing, too much on really specific areas. Because if you get there, then basically everything that's on the table, and you've all been mentioning it, is of relevance for future generations, from conflicts to climate to health. And so if we get into the substance of each of these issues, I don't think we'll get anywhere. So it's more important, I think, to have a document that is maybe not as elaborate, but that clearly focuses on the major issues that are of importance for future generations, and then help us actually, like I said, move from words to action.
Action. So thank you very much. Thank you for the presentation, and also thank you for being ready to answer the questions. So I would like to move now to actually our expert speakers. We are really very pleased to have them now with us. And our first speaker is Mr. Thomas Hale, professor in global public policy in the Blavatnik School of Government in the University of Oxford. Professor Hale's research explores how we can manage transitional problems effectively and fairly he seeks to explain how political institutions evolve or not to face the challenges raised by globalization and interdependence, with a particular emphasis on environmental, economic, and health issues. Professor Hale, we had a great pleasure reading your recent policy paper toward a declaration on future generations. So in that sense, actually, it connects immediately to what Ambassador Brandt was talking about. We have noticed some very interesting points concerning future generations, especially about the international elements of the possible declaration and its policy issues. So I really look forward to hear more of your insight and ideas on how this declaration should look like and what role can parliamentarians play in a promotion of the interests of generations. So the floor is yours, dear Professor Hale.
Thank you so much, Farah, for organizing this critical discussion on the Declaration on Future Generations. I hope you can hear me okay, and I'll share my screen, if I may, just to bring some slides in. I think it needs to be enabled. But thank you, President Setterfeld, Vice President Shakirov, and Ambassador Brandt for those opening remarks. I think you set the stage perfectly. What I hope to do is build on the declaration, the policy brief on the declaration that Farah mentioned, and share, if I could, just 5 key points for 5 questions really about what the declaration is and what it could do and how that could help us to address these questions better going forward. So let me just share these slides and I will talk to these 5 questions. What is it? Why do we need it now? What could a declaration do? What should it contain, and how do we make it happen? And I'm helped in this because Ambassador Brandt has given a fantastic overview, so I will be able to go quickly over the pieces that she already spoke to. So first, what are we talking about with a declaration on future generations? And as Ambassador Brandt said, it was proposed through the process of the UN's 75th anniversary report, Our Common Agenda, which of course has many elements, but here I want to focus on the 3 that are really tightly connected to this idea of ensuring that future generations have a bigger role in policymaking in the present. The first, of course, is the declaration itself, which would be some kind of text that creates a compact between current and future generations. But equally importantly, I think Ambassador Brandt, you said, putting the hands and feet on this are a few other institutional elements in the multilateral system that would help to really operationalize the idea of protecting future generations. So we're also speaking about a potential voice for future generations in the multilateral system. This could be an individual or individuals who was in office to support them that help to give meaning and purpose and direct concrete action to this declaration, but also a forum, an intergovernmental or maybe multi-stakeholder body within the multilateral system that can help countries to operationalize this idea domestically. So when we talk about declaration on future generations, we need, of course, the commitment itself, but also the means of implementing that commitment and those ideas as a sort of package. So that is what it is. But why are we talking about this now? And I think the opening remarks given by our other speakers really spoke precisely well to this idea. We all know that we're facing a time of an enormous number of immediate crises. And so you might think when there's a war going on, when there's an immediate impact of climate change being felt, when there's a global pandemic, when there's an ongoing crisis of underdevelopment or unsustainable debt, when there's high inflation driving fuel and food price increases that are really unsustainable for people around the world, how can we think about the future when we have so much going on in the present? But actually, I think it's quite interesting that this idea of looking more to future generations has arisen at precisely the same moment as these crises have engulfed us, because we recognize, and I think people on the ground also recognize, that when you're faced with a crisis, prevention and resilience are the only ways to get to first best outcomes. And a reactive approach where you just respond and are buffeted by crisis is not going to get us to the best possible responses. And so here the link to the Sustainable Development Agenda, which of course reaches the current SDG goals, but also reaches all the way back to the 1980s and the Brundtland Commission, this kind of long-running thread on building a more sustainable, resilient world, is absolutely central to this idea. And we should, I think, see this declaration of future generations as the logical culmination or next step in this long-running process throughout the UN, as opposed to some new thing coming in to somehow replace or distract from the Sustainable Development Agenda. It's really the same agenda. And I think that is essential because we face more what I call in my work long problems now. We're seeing collisions of human systems, which are relatively short-term in their operation, elections, media cycles, etc., and planetary systems, where the actual things that humans are affecting, such as the climate, such as biodiversity, etc., have much longer timescales. And so we're forced to think in this way of a much longer set of policy processes. But also, we're driven by changes in technology that allow us to better understand the future. We can now, for example, model changes in the global climate. Just 2 weeks ago, we saw the IPCC release its 6th annual assessment report summary thereof and show just how dire the situation is. That's only allowing us to see the future through scenarios that help us understand the needs and interests of future generations much more precisely than we could have before, and therefore create on us the obligation to act on them. And of course, technology also allows us to shape the future much more strongly. And we see this, of course, through things like nuclear weapons, biotechnology, or the one everyone's talking about today, advances in artificial intelligence. And finally, I think we need to recognize that people around the world care deeply about the fate of people in the future. And it's sort of a common moral imperative of nearly every cultural system on the face of this planet. People agree on the need to respect and care for future generations. And we see this reflected in national constitutions. So something like 40% of national constitutions today have an imperative to protect future people, future generations. And that's, I think, something now for the international system to react to and respond to. So we have this implication that we need to govern the future. And the question is, how do we do it? Well, there's a myriad of governance reforms and strategies that are needed at the multilateral level, at the national level, at the local level, across society. I put a graph here to showing you a few of the different kinds of strategies that we see taking place around the world. And the speakers who will follow me, Kat and Jack, will speak much more effectively than I about the many things that governments are doing now today to really institutionalize and take forward this idea of long-term governance. But the question we're thinking about today is not this whole massive reform that's needed across all of our systems, but rather, what is the role of a declaration on future generations specifically? And so what can this kind of multilateral change do to help drive this broader transformation that's needed? And here is, I think, important to understand the role of UN declarations as a governance tool, because we've had a lot of them, and some have had a huge impact, a transformational impact on how we organize ourselves as human societies, and some pass very quickly without much merit. And we really, I think, have a duty to ensure that this generation, this future generations oriented declaration, is of the first kind and not of the latter kind. So how can we make it effective? We have to understand both what it can do and what it can't do. Because obviously we know that a UN declaration itself is not going to make that huge set of transformations needed, but it can be a really important building block. And that building block can happen in several ways. The declaration itself creates a sort of political response to show and signal that the present range of crises need to be addressed in a deeper way. It can help to consolidate that normative consensus I was mentioning around the value of human life in the future, which you already see taking spread across cultures all around the world. And legally, it can be an important building block for greater institutionalization of protections on future generations at all levels of governance, in courts, in cities, in national governments, and all kinds of systems. Having this kind of special representative or envoy, or even perhaps a high commissioner for future generations, this voice in the multilateral system would also help to give meaning and operationalization to this idea by allowing it to raise questions about what future risks and challenges are being missed, to review key multilateral decisions from the perspective of future generations, and to support member states to implement these ideas. And finally, having this kind of forum, even though it's not going to be a decision-making body, could be a really important vector for peer learning and exchange to help to create conditions under which countries will be more likely to be able to collaborate together to take action for future generations. So having this kind of precise understanding of what value this set of reforms can add, I think, is important, because it also draws the boundaries on what makes this a meaningful declaration as opposed to just another set of words. The fourth point is, what should it contain? What should this declaration actually say? And Ambassador Brandt spoke to this already, but let me just reemphasize the point that I think there's really a value in having a declaration be short and sweet. And with any kind of UN process, of course, there's a lot of need to bring together a wide range of views. And sometimes that leads to a real, what sometimes is described as the Christmas tree effect, where everyone hangs their own particular issue onto a legal text. And then maybe it's good at getting consensus, but then it often is less effective at actually directing action because it's so vague, so general, such a compromise document that it's not able to have much impact. And so I think the opportunity for this particular declaration is actually there is a huge consensus, even across countries that disagree with each other hugely on many things, but they do agree on this point. And so we can really use this as a vector, I think, to crystallize cooperation on a precise recognition of the moral worth of future generations and a corresponding duty on us in the present to act in a way to advance their interests. And that may involve the recognition of some topics that are most central to them. And here again, the long-running, well-established UN focus on sustainable development and on the questions around technology stewardship, et cetera, I think are the core of what would be the most directly affected issues. But again, we want to be quite careful not to step into other boundaries or to confuse processes, rather to focus on that which matters most to the future generations. And I think there's also an opportunity to make this declaration a bit of a special one. Most declarations are kind of written and then sit there and are either taken up or not. But with this one, I think making a dynamic commitment where countries agree to renew or reaffirm or recast the declaration every 25 years or so, every new generation, would make it a living document, an adaptive document, and so not one that will just sit on the shelves. And finally, let me close by, how do we take this idea forward? Well, I think my assessment is that it's in a state of affairs where it's sort of kind of a little bit both too easy and too hard. And let me say what I mean by that. It's easy because everyone can agree that there's value in future generations. This is uncontroversial. Indeed, it's a long-standing commitment of the United Nations from the very first line of the Charter, as Ambassador Brandt pointed out. But then the difficulty is that it becomes so anodyne and general that it is easy to kind of descend into the usual, well, let me speak diplomatically, some of the diplomatic contestation around the UN tends to take things and make them bargaining chips for other agendas or to kind of get sidelined or reshuffled. And so there's a real, I think, urgency to place the appropriate political weight onto this outcome from the highest levels to ensure that it rises above this kind of to and fro and trading of different priorities that happen sometimes in diplomatic negotiations. And so we need to share this idea widely. We need to engage and connect to a wide range of communities to show how the work they're doing, say in climate or in health or in development or in food security or in medicine, is actually very much linked to this idea, not a kind of side concern. And it really needs political champions. And here I think the role of parliamentarians is critical because as politicians, you have the unique role, duty, and responsibility to speak for the interests of your constituents. And that allows this agenda, which is fundamentally about representation and about democracy in a world where we face these long-term challenges, to be realized further. So I'm delighted to be able to share the ideas with you and this group and looking forward to the discussion going forward. Thank you for your time.
Thank you very much. Thank you. Thank you. I think so. It was really very clear, and you made also, I think, very clear why it is needed and such a declaration, and also the importance of that really for governance purposes, but that it doesn't stay also as a kind of words, but invites actually everybody and every society and all the governments also to take action. So I think very, very important actually follow up to what Ambassador Brandt already said. So I just wanted to see whether there is someone who wants to ask a very urgent clarification question, so that we just take time, 1 or 2 minutes for clarification questions, and then continue. And if not, so just, yeah, you can write in the chat if you want, or raise your hand if you have a very short question for clarification purposes. Otherwise, we continue with our next speaker. So I don't see any questions. So everything was very clear. So then our next speaker is Ms. Kat Zuzarte Tuli, who leads the School of International Futures, a non-profit international collective of practitioners based in the UK who use futures thinking to inspire change at the local, national, and global levels. And the School of International Futures helps actually policymakers and business leaders improve the present and the future by using foresight and future methods to make better strategic choices to improve the quality of their innovation and make their organizations more resilient by better understanding and managing risks. He runs a few interesting projects on checking upcoming legislation on its long-term impact on future generations. I think actually you are the best person to really combine everything which was said till now and actually guide us to the next step of our discussions. Ms. Tuli, floor is yours.
Well, thank you very much. And what an absolute pleasure it is, Special Representative and ambassadors and friends and colleagues on the line to be speaking about this. And let me commend you on both the commitment, the interest, but also the quality of the conversation so far. It's a really exciting agenda. And what I thought I would do is actually focus on what practical measures that you as parliamentarians and within OSCE can take to promote the interests and rights of future generations today, including examples like the one that you just mentioned. But first, I wanted to perhaps get into a little bit why this future generations issue and thinking about the future is such an urgent agenda today, a little bit counterintuitively, and why parliamentarians are themselves so critical to getting real change on this topic. And this comes from the perspective of having worked on this agenda, trying to get policy making to be more aware of future generations, both the past 20 years, both within government and then working with the innovators in governments around the world and in the UN who are pushing this. So why is there a growing interest? And it is fascinating. You've got these envoy and declaration commitments at the Our Common Agenda, but also the World Summit of Parliamentary Committees on the Future are meeting for the second time in Uruguay. There's a growing number of future generations commissioners. There's the German Constitutional Court just ruled recently, a couple of years ago, there's been an intergenerational parliamentary commission set up by the new government in Australia. And there's a growing number of schools of government that are teaching us for the future generation, next generation of policy officials. So what we can do is perhaps apply foresight, which is a structured way of exploring how change happens over time, to what's been happening over the past 70 years to get us to where we are now. And I think the big thing that we really have to lean into is that over the past 70 years, we have gone as humanity in this world from having 2.5 generations alive at any one moment throughout all of life and humanity, the past 20,000 years, to suddenly 4 generations alive at any one time. This has meant, because of the health improvements, that our average age of our citizens have gone down as we've had a youth bulge, and then up as we've got aging populations. And as Tom so pertinently said, for the first time, we've realized that the impact of our decisions today are affecting not just us, but generations in the future, both because of potential existential risks from technology, but also because we're not moving quickly enough on the climate transition. And these both involve costs that are either going to be paid now or in the future. So what we have, unsurprisingly, is that questions of distribution over time have suddenly become really important. And similarly, therefore, decision-making and governance processes need updating because of these new realities. We need new ways to agree these big questions and to rediscuss the intergenerational social contract effectively. And by working with politicians and civil servants who are really leaning into this agenda, there's 3 really interesting cross-cutting implications. One is that although we're talking about future generations and impacts in 5 or 10 generations' time, it's actually really urgent that we do something about it now, because otherwise we lock in those impacts. The second implication is that we are addressing the concerns of real people on the streets today, as well as those of future generations, because it's about people's fear for the future of their children, about water quality, about employment, about pensions, about delivering on the SDGs. So in reality, concerns about social justice and intergenerational fairness go together, not a trade-off. And it's interesting to see that when you look into it through research, the solutions that promote one, institutions and policymaking process, actually promote the other. And then the third implication that politicians and parliamentarians share is that we really need to address the real barriers, because most people, if you ask them, actually kind of agree, yeah, we want to do the right thing for future generations, but what's the actual problem? And very often the issue is that when policies are being developed, designed and agreed, there is a data gap about the long-term consequences, and that's often because the long-term consequences are not in your area of focus, but in adjacent policy areas. Your focus on infrastructure affects families or jobs, not within infrastructure. But there's also a constituency gap. So who picks up the phone to contact parliamentarians to advocate for the interests? Now, narrative, dialogue, coalition building, scrutiny, representation, these are all things that you as parliamentarians do. This is your profession. And Parliament is actually the legitimate seat of bipartisan long-term visions for a nation. So this is why it's really interesting to see the exciting examples and work of parliaments and how they've been contributing to this agenda in three ways. I want to talk about institutional innovation, I want to talk about scrutiny, and I want to talk about political outreach and leadership. On the institutional innovation piece, obviously Finland's Committee of the Future, Parliamentary Committee of the Future, is a gold standard. It does inquiries, does scrutiny, connects to the Prime Minister's office, but also the investment arms of the Finnish government, across government, and engages with the public. But Canada, Lithuania, Poland, Vietnam, others have got them. Other parliamentarian setups are also beginning to set up informal groupings. This is a great way of moving forward. And we're going to hear more about the Welsh example, which is a very powerful one. But then there's also something about scrutiny. So New Zealand has departmental long-term insights briefings from each of the departments, and also wellbeing budgets that are reviewed and scrutinized in Parliament and held to account. That's a powerful tool. The US General Accountability Office is commissioned by the US to look at the long term, commissioned by the US Congress. And so they've been doing excellent work over the past decade, including looking at the impact of AI on policymaking. And interestingly enough, what we're seeing, and this is a common pattern, is that there's already something on the books to indicate that the US Congress has got a role to scrutinize for future generations. And the important thing is, using the great term, we need to put hands and feet on it. We need to activate it. It's not always about new legislation, but as is a common theme, different ways of actually making it happen. And as you identified, Special Representative, we've been working at various countries, including piloting in the UK with the informal bipartisan committee looking at future generations, how to do a future check. So when legislation comes to Parliament, you can ask the question, which are the generations that are benefiting net and which are the ones that are paying for it? And that tool itself, and I'll put these things in the link, can also be applied in your own constituencies, as it is in Portugal, to decide like where should things be put. But also the president is using it in Portugal to review legislation. So then let's really get into the really important bit that's missing, which is around the importance of parliamentarians on political outreach and leadership. And it's great to see leaders, for example, Ursula von der Leyen at the European Parliament, actually committing to the importance of this issue in September last year and discussing treaty change. And also, for example, the youth wing of the European People's Party, which is the network of 27 different, more conservative leaning parties in the member states, are they've passed a resolution about future generations because no wonder there are big decisions being made about energy, environment, debt that influence them. It's great to see parliamentarians getting involved in national futures dialogues like the ones in Mongolia on health and North Macedonia on the future of the country. But I'll leave you with the last point on the importance of connecting to young change makers and making space for those young people to meaningfully influence decisions. The role that you have as parliamentarians to make that happen is really powerful. And there's a network of young foresight practitioners using foresight to structure powerful evidence-based conversations about the future. We run this community of about 700 and it's growing from 80 different countries, and they've been invited to the Blue Zone at COP27 to talk about intergenerational fairness on climate. They've come together across countries to pull together a peaceful futures manifesto looking out 50 years, and that's going to be launched on the 16th of May, which is the International Day of Living Together in Peace. And those are young foresight practitioners from Lebanon, Russia, Nigeria, US, Britain, Poland, Philippines that are saying there's a lot of division between us in the here and now of 2023, but let's look out 30, 40 years and create the future that we want. They use structured ways to influence and provide effective evidence to influence manifesto development in Kenya, for example. And in the UK, you have next generation champions who are hosting local intergenerational conversations about the future of the UK and its role in the world, and then connecting that to their members of parliament and also parliament itself. So I hope, and this is where I'm finishing off, I hope this gives you some practical ideas and measures around how parliamentarians individually in your national bodies and also in these very important multilateral fora that you're convening, how you can actually do something to promote and secure interests of future generations today. So as a member of parliament in the national body, participating in order to represent their views in these institutions, whether informal or formal, holding intergenerational dialogues, scrutinizing upcoming legislation for intergenerational fairness, and advocating, building that narrative, connecting it to citizens around why this is important, is super powerful. And then as a member of your party, reviewing your manifestos for these commitments, and then when you get into government, implementing that is very important. But within OSCE, I have 4 proposals and suggestions for you. One is around committing to this principle of intergenerational fairness as an institution and reviewing decisions around this. Secondly is connecting with other parliamentary institutions, because as Tom said, and the ambassador said, parliamentarians have such a critical role to play. So whether it's the Commonwealth networks, the networks of parliamentary committees of the future, as I mentioned, working together, this is a heavy political lift, but it's something that we can do. The importance of having a forum within OSCE where you can support your early adopters, and I hope that some of them are on this call. I know that there's great leadership in different countries, how to develop common narratives stating why it's important on your issues around security, governance, peace building and democracy, and really committing to bringing youth in for meaningful engagement and shaping decisions and creating space for future generations thinking. And in particular, I think it is really important to focus in on supporting young parliamentarians and their networks, because from what I can see, they are currently doing quite a lot of the heavy lift in their national governments and multilateral regional bodies, and not always getting the support that they deserve. And so that's an easy thing to kind of take forward. So I know that I've thrown a huge amount at you because this is such an exciting topic. I'll put some links in the chat. Always reach out, because the innovation and the ideas and the energy are already there and with you, and it's about kind of just bringing us together and weaving that coalition for change. Thank you so much for your leadership, and all the best.
Thank you very much. Thank you, dear Ms. Tully. It is really fantastic to see also your enthusiasm in really trying to deliver the message, and also very clear suggestions. I think things that we as parliamentarians recognize as tools that we have and we use it also in actually our everyday work. And then is the important thing how to connect it to this future generation discussion. And I think what you mentioned, actually division now, how to really make from the journey from the division now, which exists actually in the world, unfortunately, to a common future. That is actually what we are aiming, and we need each other. So thank you very much for this very inspiring presentation. So again, to my colleagues, the question, is there any someone who wants to ask a question for clarification? Then we could actually use 1 or 2 minutes to ask that. Otherwise, I can move actually to next speaker. Yeah, I don't see. Then I would actually move to the next speaker, and our last but not least speaker in today's panel is Mr. Jacob Ellis, a lead changemaker in the Office of the Future Generations Commissioner for Wales, which is a bright example of the establishment of legal instrument in advocating for rights of future generations. I think this is a good example of, you know, the suggestions that Ms. Tully was making. And Mr. Ellis is also a fellow of the Next Generation Fellows Program, launched by UN Foundation to bring together young leaders to support the UN Secretary General's work to reimagine the future of global cooperation. So, Mr. Ellis, I really look forward to hearing from you. So please, the floor is yours.
Hello, good afternoon, or Prynhawn da, as we would say in Welsh. My pronouns are he, him. President Sederfeld, Vice President Shakarov, and Secretary General Montella, colleagues, thank you, Farah, for the opportunity to be with you today. And it's a pleasure to join Kat and Tom on the panel. Distinguished members, before I begin, I like to set out my interventions with future generations directly in my mind. So tomorrow, it's estimated that around 385,000 babies will be born. So the decisions we make today in this gathering are for them, for the children of tomorrow. In a world where geopolitical tensions and conflict have the potential to wreak global havoc, and where in the age of polycrises of economic instability, cost of living and energy crisis, and a climate and nature emergency, the multilateral system should be a platform for collaboration and a beacon of stability and long-term thinking. The UN and others have proved on countless occasions its ability to bring leaders together across sectors to act for future generations. The SDGs themselves and the 2030 Sustainable Development Agenda provide us with a collective long-term vision for the world we want. The SDGs themselves provide a strong intergenerational relevance. But colleagues, we can and must do more. I hope I will provide some of the impetus for you to take further collective action, leveraging members, networks and resources towards the adoption of a UN Declaration for Future Generations. I would like to take the opportunity to thank and congratulate efforts made by your Assembly to lead the way on this agenda. I too would like to highlight the leadership of Ambassador Brandt, the Dutch team, and my gratitude to their commitment alongside Fiji previously and Jamaica to meaningfully engage and embed youth in these processes. I've been asked to reflect on a variety of areas, so forgive me in advance for the journey I'm about to take you on in my intervention today. The importance of youth participation, the ideas that we have which can solidify youth engagement in the declaration, and the fair challenge, I hope, that you will allow me to make as I share my reflections today. I have the pleasure, as has been outlined, of being a UNICEF Youth Foresight Fellow, a United Nations Foundation Next Generation Fellow, and of course my role at the Office of the Future Generations Commissioner for Wales. And I know that the opportunity to influence the Future Generations agenda has never been more potent and more fragile. We get this wrong, we confine the topic to another decade or so on the policy shelf. But this isn't just a moment, it's a movement or a momentum of sorts, and where the member states achieve in setting a declaration for future generations or not, it is highly important that you are committed to doing your bit. Across the world, parliaments provide examples of mechanisms and methodologies to embed future generations' approaches in politics, in governance, and in policy. Together, we can ensure decisions taken meet the needs of the present without compromising the ability of future generations to meet their own needs. A generation continuum which binds us to our grandparents and our grandchildren, their children, and their children to come. I'm proud to come from Wales, a country recently famed for reaching the Men's Football World Cup for the first time in over 60 years, and the likes of Gareth Bale and our glorious landscapes are some of our key global reference points. But I'm also proud of Wales's many firsts: the first fair trade nation, the first parliament in the world to declare a climate emergency, and the first country to place the Sustainable Development Goals and the needs of future generations in law, with our groundbreaking Wellbeing of Future Generations Act, a law that places a legal duty on all our public institutions to promote sustainable development and take action to create a better world for those not yet born. Wales is the only country, therefore, to apply a truly intergenerational lens to the way it delivers. An independent Children's Commissioner, an independent Older People's Commissioner, and an independent Future Generations Commissioner stand ready as representatives championing intergenerational fairness. When I'm asked what governments need to do to ensure young people are included in decision-making and are active citizens in designing the future, a few key principles and learning come to mind. Young people must play a leading role in the design, execution, and follow-up of the SDG Summit, the Summit of the Future, and the Declaration for Future Generations. This is in part because we have the greatest stake in the future. Many of us will live to see the end of this century. Our children and grandchildren will live far into the next. So we are the people who will inherit the consequences of decisions that are made or not made at these upcoming summits and in the adoption of a new UN declaration. But it's also because we have proven time and time again that we are energetic, innovative, and capable. On the fringes of the declaration and the summits are the actions we take as individual member states. I would encourage you to think about how you and the UN can facilitate youth participation in creating the futures they want. Such examples of meaningful opportunities to give power directly to young people can be found across your countries, from national youth conversations to electoral reform. Recent changes in Wales mean that young people aged 14 are now able to register to vote, and 16 and 17-year-olds can now vote in Welsh Parliament elections and local government elections. These decisions mean that young people will now rightly have a say over critical issues that affect their future, such as health, education, and the economy, boosting our democracy, strengthening citizenship, and boosting political engagement. I also believe the declaration should address the importance of ensuring young people have the right skills for the future. Specifically, government should enhance capacity and strategic foresight among young people. In fact, I would go further to suggest that all staff and parliamentarians possibly on this call today should receive mandatory futures literacy training and seek to work with young people to create the right environments and lifelong learning in this space. Colleagues, business as usual isn't working. It requires new mindsets, new frontiers to explore, and new ideas. I welcome the UN Secretary General's appetite for the UN Declaration to welcome steps to establish a network of capabilities across the UN system for more forward-looking focus in policymaking and for steps towards future impact assessments on key policies and programs. I'd like to possibly end with my final thoughts to a few general comments as you seek to expand your support for the Declaration for Future Generations. No declaration will be successful without implementation or accountability. Mechanisms must be identified within the declaration to ensure young people are part of the monitoring steps. I welcome the opening remarks by Mr. Shirov in this respect. I further hope that member states and colleagues present today will support the appointment of a special envoy for future generations. And that such a declaration would outline this endorsement. And perhaps may I suggest at this stage, as Kat and Tom have also suggested, that you too start to think or to further your thoughts on what you can do as an assembly, perhaps in establishing a Future Generations Committee or an envoy or representative, and seek to design Future Generations principles among its members and secretariat. within policy development, but also in the processes it takes around human resources, operations, assets, risk and budgets. Foresight and future generations should be at the heart of both policy and process. I'm also proud to be the Secretariat for the Network of Institutions for Future Generations, and we stand ready to support you. This network is an independent international network encompassing national institutions, organisations and leaders working to ensure the rights, interests and well-being for future generations within the ambition for sustainable development. Additionally, in partnership with Foundations for Tomorrow, the Future Generations Commissioner will be launching the Policy Toolkit for Future Generations, a resource for parliamentarians and policymakers to help guide them towards applying future generations methods. And I look forward to promoting this resource with you when we launch this later in May. Placing the world on a path to achieve sustainable development is a core principle that the Declaration must address. But of course, the Agenda 2030, the clue is in the title, that's up until 2030. And there are far bigger issues and timelines that need to be considered. It is about recognizing the opportunities as well as the risks ahead for future generations and create a holistic framework for member states and others to strengthen national implementation. Finally, there will be comments that the system already responds well to future generations' needs and interests. That it isn't necessary to produce a declaration. But colleagues, it is essential that we recall, consolidate and reaffirm in one clear international instrument the commitments that have already been made and which need to be created in the face of a new era of challenges and opportunities. And young people globally stand ready to support you to think, plan and take action for a better future for all. Thank you. Thank you, Farah.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Jacob. I think thank you for the presentation, but also for your activism and also as a young person being really involved in this whole conversation. And I think you made it also clear that why it is important to engage the young people in this in this process. As you mentioned, yeah, you have higher stake in future. Just do the math and you understand that, I would say. So thank you very much. And is there any technical question for Jacob from one of the participants? If not, then we could actually move, thank you again, Jacob. We could move to the actually open debate and a brainstorming session. And I would really like to invite my colleagues to take the floor. There have been some who already registered in advance. So Manucher is going to manage this part because he has the list and he would be able actually to give the floor to you. And I would like really to invite all of you to take maximum 3 minutes because more or less we have more or less half an hour left. And we want really to hear as many as possible of participants and colleagues. And I would like also to share with you that I am planning to really make a suggestion in the form of supplementary item to our meeting in Vancouver on this topic of actually future generations. So I have already really noted a few of the suggestions made by our speakers so that we could really take to our supplementary item in Vancouver and make it actually part of the declaration that our annual meeting will make in Vancouver in June, beginning July of this year, which could actually give a kind of recommendations to the parliamentarians to take this agenda further. So thank you very much, the speakers, for all those suggestions. But please, colleagues, now floor is yours so that you come up with ideas, that you come up with maybe also questions for our speakers. I know that Ms. Tully had to leave because she had another again appointment about the same topic. But the other two speakers, Thomas and Jacob, are on the panel, and I'm really very happy that you will stay here, so that maybe at the end of the discussion you could come up also give actually your reflection on what was said by my colleagues. Manu Chair, so I pass it to you to lead the discussion, please.
Thank you very much, Farah. For the moment, we have two participants signed up for the speakers list. The first one is Miss Lilia Sigurðardóttir from Iceland. So, dear Lilia, you have the floor.
Thank you so much. I would like to start by thanking you for this webinar. This has been really interesting, and I have written down a lot of things that I've heard here that I plan on using in my work within the Icelandic Parliament. One thing that I take forward from this meeting here is that how can we as members of Parliament look into the future and secure that we are taking decisions in the best interest of the future generations? Of course, the best case scenario would be to know the future, but since that is considered impossible, we just have to figure out the most likely scenario or scenarios and base our decision on that. In that regard, I would like to tell you about future committees that we have one future committee here in Iceland. And one of the purposes of that committee is to provide analysis of legislation on long-term perspectives and to discuss different scenarios. Future committees are actually becoming a part of parliaments all around the world. And we had the first World Summit of Future Committees in Parliaments last year in Finland. And in the committee that we have here in Iceland, we gather around experts and parliamentarians to discuss topics that the Parliament decides and to gather information regarding foresights and policymaking. One of the key pillars of the discussion is how does this affect future generations? And this is a really important platform for experts and members of Parliament to take a step further and discuss scenarios and take decisions regarding the future and future generations. Just to mention a few things that have been discussed in these meetings within the Icelandic Parliament, then I can mention generational calculations that they are intended to show what awaits future generations in terms of tax burden and government spending based on unchanged fiscal priorities and policies. I could also mention environment, energy, sustainability, security, education, technology, health. There are a lot of things that we can discuss within the committee. And a lot of countries are taking big steps in terms of securing the interest on future generations. And we plan on doing that here in Iceland. And therefore, this meeting has been really good for that work. And I thank you for this webinar.
Thank you very much. The next speaker on my list is Mr. David Stockmüller from Austria. David, you have the floor.
Thank you, Manushka. Hello, I hope you're all good. Thank you very much, Farah, for organizing this meeting. I think it's very helpful for our work. Thank you, Margareta, for having us here for your presentation. And also Mr. Sakharov for the president, as vice president. Very good to have this meeting, to find us. And as you know, maybe not the experts, and I'm very happy to have you all here because it's very interesting and help us for our work. And as you know, we create a group in the OSCE for young parliamentarians, where young MPs, maybe the next political leaders, from all over the OECD region come together and discuss topics like youth politics, security, and the impact for young people, and all the big issues and topics we have and we face in the future. It's a very interesting discussion there. We are at the beginning, and of course we are, and this meeting will help us in norm that we find our topics and what we will focus in the future. But I want only to mention three things where I think, or we think as an Austria, where are the big topics where we have to focus. That's regaining the trust of the younger generation in democracy. It's effectively dealing with current crisis and responding to tomorrow's crisis already today. And when we regaining the trust of younger generations, the generation C is the most political generation of young people in many years, but their trust in the democracy is slipping. We see that a lot. We see it as a corrupt system in the political system, old, captured by powerful interests, and too slow to respond to the crisis that matters. Effective and anti-corruption policy could be helps a lot, that we can change this, that we fix the trust in the crisis of our democracies by improving transparency and preventing bad faith actors taking too much influence on policy. And from upper limits on donations is also a big point in this corruption fighting, to more transparency and who donates to whom. Exchanging anti-corruption best practices has to be the key part of any declaration of future generations. It's one point I want only to mention because it's also a big impact in many countries we see. And also dealing with current crisis effectively. I think, yes, Putin's illegal invasion of Ukraine has brought great suffering to the people of Ukraine and beyond, and its secondary effects have been felt worldwide. We see it's not only in Ukraine, we see it also in Armenia, we see it also in the Balkan states like Bosnia and Herzegovina, Kosovo, Serbia, only want to mention some of them. And it's rising the prices, rising the costs of living. You also mentioned it already, rising the energy prices and the economy slowdown throughout the OECD region poses a great challenge, and also for the younger generations. When I think of living, it's an immense impact. We can already see the effects through statistics like house ownership. Many young people continue to live at home well into their 20s. Before we can deal with the urgent problems facing young people tomorrow, we need to effectively and quickly lessen the burden on the younger generation today. We should consider the role international organizations like the OECD and also can play here. Is this all only a matter for domestic policy? I don't think so, because I think as an international committee, we have to contribute, we have to fight on it and all this topic. And in the context, I want to also mention, because Mr. Halley mentioned the artificial intelligence, I think it's a very big topic. Some months ago, no one knows it, but it's also a chance. But we all, as a politicians, we all in the politics, has also to react quick, because there's also chances, but there's also some risk in it, because young people has not the guarantee that the jobs from today are the jobs for tomorrow. We don't know it. We don't know what if it's in the future, it's changing. And I think the political system is too slow. We waiting too much time. We don't act quick enough that we can change it. We see in Italy they stopped it immediately. But I think it's a good technology where we have chances to for the next generation, and we have to work on it. And only I want to mention is also the responding to tomorrow's crisis is also today. The vast majority of science agree that we have a very small number of years to keep the damage caused by the climate emergency within limits. The 2020s will be the decisive decade of the future, not just of today's young people, but all future generations to follow. And you mentioned it, we simply cannot ignore the biggest challenge of the future of humanity in a dialogue on future generation. There will be no dialogue unless we lay the foundation for large scale system level action today. And this, of course, connects to other regional challenges in the OECD. We have the brain drain from the east to the west. It's for young people. I was in Moldavia with the migration group some days before, and it's a big topic there in Moldavia, the brain drop. We have the democratic backsliding and authoritarianism back to the hard politician things. But these problems are global and interconnected. So we need to think globally and interconnected too. I think I only want to mention that, and I think it's very thankful for this meeting and staff support. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Mr. Stogmüller. The next on my list is Ms. Lucia Tacer from Slovenia. And dear participants, if you would like to take the floor, please indicate this in the chat so we add you to the list. Thank you very much. Ms. Tacer, you have the floor.
Thank you. Thank you from my side as well for organizing this event. It's been very interesting. It's always good to hear what is happening on a higher scale, because I think, as one of the speakers mentioned, it's easy for us parliamentarians to get caught up in the everyday news cycle. So this has been very interesting. I would like to make 2 points. The first one is about meaningfully including young people, which I think is important, because usually in representative bodies that we're talking about, the youth is underrepresented, and the key to facing these challenges of the future generations, I think, is in the intergenerational collaboration. So here, I think a lot of emphasis is usually placed on meaningfully including young people who don't maybe hold formal positions of power yet, which is extremely important. However, I think maybe I miss sometimes on the international level the emphasis on enabling young people to run for also formal positions to have the agency to decide. And not only for parliaments, there's a great initiative I'm aware of in the IPU, Say Yes to Youth in Parliament, but I think we can also do more to stimulate, support young people to get engaged in formal decision-making bodies. And this way, I think we can contribute to decision-making that will have the future generations in mind more maybe than it does today. And then on the second point, I just wanted to add that here in Slovenia, we established a youth caucus not a long time ago, and we got very good responses of organizations really excited to see some work on this topic that's not partisan, but institutional from decision makers. So I'm really interested in these ideas of the future check and bodies that focus on future generations. So thank you again from my end, and I look forward to having more of these debates. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I believe the list of speakers is closed. We don't have any other people who signed up. So Farah will give the floor back to you.
Yeah, thank you very much. Thank you, Madam Chair. I think it is really good to see that members of our network of young parliamentarians have been quite active in this debate. So thank you very much. And I would like actually to invite also our Secretary General, Roberto Montella, to reflect on what you have heard and what your thoughts might be on really the role that the Parliamentary Assembly also could play on this discussion. So please, floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Farah. Thank you very much. Well, first of all, let me thank Madam President for attending the meeting. It's very important that also you pay attention to this important network. Congratulations, Farah and Ashkar Shakirov and Madam Chair for taking this initiative. I mean, I think this is very timely And I think it was a big success, 35 participants on the eve of a big holiday. So it shows that the issue is of big interest. I would like also to use the opportunity to thank David and congratulate him for the recent initiative that he took in Vienna, the establishment of the network and the meetings that they had in Vienna. Farah, I take on your question on what the OSCE Parliamentary Assembly can do on this. I would take it from two sides, from the administrative side, the responsibilities of the Secretariat, and also from the politician side. At the Secretariat, we have 23 staff, which are the non-elected, apart from me and Gustavo, we are elected position, but I'm saying those who are employees, it's 23, of which 10, I just made a rough count, I think. I think I'm pretty much sure that 10 are below the age of 35, which I think is the age that was established as the age limit to be part of the youth group. So of this figure, I'm very proud because we have already young generations and future generations within the OSCE Parliamentary Assembly. So 10 out of 23, then everybody knows I consider myself still a very young generation, although I'm below the threshold. but yes, I think we are very much a very young group of employees at the International Secretariat. From the political point of view, what can be done? And this I take on very much to the point that was made by Lucia. I think besides hoping to get space within the Parliamentary Assembly, I think, and as I've learned it myself, you need to learn to take your own space, especially when you are younger. It's not always easy to make your way in to the elected positions of the Bureau of the Parliamentary Assembly, or also in other aspects of life for young generations. So I think in the Parliamentary Assembly, I would give exactly the same advice I gave last year in Birmingham to some young politicians who was running for office. It's just go ahead and run for office. These in the Parliamentary Assembly, there is a tradition normally, that of course the political group kind of discuss between themselves and kind of decide, well, for that position we suggest this person, for that position. But the filter that comes from the political group is not, it's maybe an informal agreement between leaders of the groups, but it's not a must. If an MP wants to run for any position, for the 9 positions of the committees, so there are 3 positions in each committee, you can just come to the desk before the beginning of the last session and just say, I want to be a candidate. You don't need to collect signatures, you don't need anything, you just put yourself there and you will be a candidate for 9 of the 20 positions that there are in the bureaus. For vice presidents, of course, and for president and for treasurer, for those you need to collect 25 signatures and present those 25 signatures 24 hours, I think, at the table office just prior to the end of the, let's say, the closing of the candidature. So that's all. I mean, of course, it's good to discuss it within the political groups, but if somebody feels that you have enough critical mass and something to say, just go ahead. I think sometimes your young generations have to have also the courage to take on their own space. That's my message. Thank you very much. And again, congratulations, great initiative.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Roberto. And I would like actually to invite Thomas and Jacob if they want to have a kind of final reflection, recommendation for us. I mean, it is very, as you see, we make this connection between actually the young generation, the participation of youth, and also what the strengthening of the position of young parliamentarians in our own assembly, and at the same time, the whole discussion about future generations, while knowing if we don't take actually the necessary measures now related to issues like climate change. And so I just don't know how many future generations will exist. So in that sense, the urgency of the topic of future generations is for me really very, very high. And for myself, actually, the big question is how can we deliver this really make this urgency also clear to audience, to the public, to politicians, to broader audience. So please keep it short. We are at the end of our time, so 2 or 3 minutes max each. But please, I would say, Thomas, please start.
Thank you, Ms. Karimi. I see a hand from President Sederfeld as well. I don't know
Yes,
if you'd like
yes,
to
yes. I will. Yes, I saw that.
Wonderful. Well, let me just focus then on 2 points that I think came out of our discussion. One is the really critical importance of representation. And we've heard this in the discussion from the parliamentarians just now on how to build power for younger voices in the political process, and looking beyond the current young people to future young people and future older people and future people overall. How do we give them actual power? Because their interests are directly implicated by our actions, and yet we don't have tools. And so we need to think about how this idea of shifting the actual power structures can be achieved. And that's not sort of sounds radical when you say it that way, but actually it's just a recognition of the reality that we already are facing, and a chance to update our governance institutions in a way that's going to help us get there. And so just like the expansion of representative democracy in the 19th century, just like the expansion of multilateralism in the 20th century, now in the 21st century, we need to again recast our political institutions in a way that can respond to the reality we actually live in. And so I think the second point is how we get there. And here we need to move beyond the sort of general sense of young people are important, future people are important, and actually think about operationalization of how we build that together. And that's where I think the Declaration on Future Generations is such an important tool, because it's not just, well, it has the potential at least to not just be another bland, generic statement, but actually a vector, a building block to actual changes in our governance systems. And I think that's where we'd like to aim toward. So Thank you again for organizing this. And I think parliamentarians have such a key role to play in this. I look forward to your continued efforts.
Thank you very much. Thank you again, Thomas, for your participation and your sharing your insights. Jacob,
thank you. Thank you for the reflections in that discussion there. I want to draw my quick final remarks from a Welsh phrase that our patron saint said, apparently. I wasn't around at the time, but we mark St. David's Day on the 1st of March, and his phrase was, do the small things in life. And the second part of that is to do so joyfully. And I want to draw on that reflection, because I think there are small changes, there are small steps that you can take as governments, as parliaments, to start thinking about adopting further future generations' practices and methods in your work, and to do so joyfully, because this is a new terrain. This is quite an experiment in an innovation in one sense as well. There's no right way or wrong way of doing this. There are, of course, many examples across the world now of countries and institutions who have started to build this into their practices, draw on that, adopt where appropriate, but carve a new space of learning and practice in this space as well. And I'm one of those people, and Tom's been part of conversations that I've been in the past, where I've made this really important point that yes, the future is scary, it is unknown, it is uncertain, it is full of risk. But I do hope that as we talk about future generations more, that we also build in a more balanced view around opportunities that we have ahead as well, whilst not forgetting the risks that we've got to combat, but also drawing on the opportunities. And I hope that that you will continue to challenge yourselves as an assembly, not only on the declaration, which is can be seen as quite a detached view from yourselves. I hope that you can draw back locally into your own communities and your own national contexts, and see it as I'll put the link into a chat to a resource that we produced around a maturity matrix. This is a journey. So what would be the simple changes? What would be the steps that, if you were leading the way, what characteristics would you be showing? And a challenge potentially to the 25 members of staff that Roberto has is to think about the vision that you would like to have for Vorosky PA in 2050? What does that look like? What does sustainability look like in that context? And what steps would you need to put in place in order to get you to that point? And I'm sure it's on your mind regardless, but I look forward to working with you and colleagues to help unpick that if you'd like. Thank you, Farah, and thank you, colleagues.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Jacob. I think that's really a good challenge, asking actually Roberto, but not only Roberto, I would say actually the whole leadership of the parliament to think about that, actually to have such an exercise. So where do we see ourselves in 2050? I mean, what do we want actually as a kind of idea and exercise and also different options, scenarios. Maybe we are going to have a discussion about Helsinki plus 50. This is already actually started talking about, because in 2 years, 2025, we will have 50 years after the Helsinki Declaration, which was actually the first steps, maybe the baby steps of OSCE. But then now we facing a new challenges. But what does it mean actually? The ideas what we had 50 years ago for now and also for the future. I think this is a very good recommendation. So Margareta, I think you wanted to give an advice to our young parliamentarians. Please go ahead. The floor is yours.
Thank you. Yes, it was just some small comments and something to think about when you are planning your further political career. And I think what Secretary General said is also very, very important to be aware of. But what I would like to say, sorry.
No problem.
So let's say, first of all, what you are doing here, build network. Your network is so important. You have network in your national parliament, in your constituency, in your national parliament, but build also here in OSCE, Parliamentary Assembly. Then what I would like to say is also just what was said here earlier. For yourself, make a plan, a roadmap, a goal. What do you want to do? And think also, what should you do to achieve what you want to do? Without a plan, you don't know what you will. And talk about this plan with your colleagues that you trust and think you can share views with. So you can do this together. What I also would say is make yourself visible for others. Use the different arenas, scenarios that are there. In OSCE PA, write, for example, a supplementary item. Is it too difficult with all this long paper? Make some amendments. Take the floor. Give a speech. Make an intervention. I think that's a very good way forward. And put also this on the scene. For example, at every meeting, you should make a comment. Not be the one who talk all the time, because that's not a good idea. But make one intervention. For example, this is a very practical advice. And then, of course, be active in your political group. You are elected back home in a political group. You have support back home in your national parliament. Otherwise, you wouldn't have been appointed to be a member of the OSCE delegation. Use that network as well. And then be active in your political group. Make known what you want to do. And the political group is actually very, very important, because the political group, they put the person together. Who should we nominate? Who shouldn't we nominate? And make agreements with other groups. And that's one thing. Then, of course, you can also always raise your hand and say, here I am, I would like to run. But it's much more difficult, because I know as a politician that the political network is quite strong, and it's always easier if you have a position in your political group, and the leadership in your political group negotiate with your name and try to make an arrangement so you can be elected. I'm saying this because it's not always people are aware, delegates are aware about this network. And the political groups, they meet always. Take an hour to take part in the group meeting and make yourself known there. And then there is one more thing. It's very important to have something you want to achieve. What do you want to do? If you don't have any ideas what you want to do, why should you put all this time, all these efforts in the duty? And the last thing, have fun, because politics is fun. And if you enjoy, you will also be a person who look happy and be happy and are a person that it's easier to feel trust in. But I'm sure you will do a lot. And then one more thing I would say. When a person say, we have all met with them. I have also met with them, both when I was young and when I have been elderly. Somebody who tell you, well, this is very complicated. You need a lot of experience and it is too difficult for you. Say, yes, it's difficult, but I accept the challenge. Don't let anybody stop you unless yourself want to be stopped. That's
thank
what
you
I
very
would like
much,
to say.
Margareta.
And also thank you to the speakers, and thank you, Farah, and thank you, Vice President Ashka Shakirov. And it's always a pleasure to see that Secretary General take part in the meetings and enjoy the full meeting. And also thank you very much to Manu Chair for the sharing. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Dear participants, Madam President and Mr. Secretary General Thomas, dear Jacob, really everybody, I'm really grateful for your participation and also for all the contributions that you made. I just want to make a few actually summaries. The first is this, for me personally, this webinar made it really very clear that this declaration on future generations that we are working on or on at the UN level that's worked on is really, really very important to reach out about it, to talk about it, because honestly, in the Netherlands, even the Dutch has such an important role to play. Actually, in the Dutch constituency, nobody's aware of that. It is not on the political agenda. It is not really very much talked about it, and I think this is really one of the I would say points that I am taking, at least for myself, but that's I guess also true for other parliamentarians. Let's make it really known in our parliaments and try to really make it so known, and that the people know this process is going on and why it is relevant, and how could we make it even more relevant. I think this issue of declaration and then implementation, monitoring, really that it shouldn't, and I found it really fantastic to hear that short is sweet. I don't think that the short people think like that, but the short is sweet is a good phrase to take with us for the declaration. So that's one thing. And then I think also, Madam Chair, we should also think about it maybe with the network of young parliamentarians together to see what could we do more to make it known to also other delegations, to other people. So that was one thing. The other thing is on what I said on the supplementary item and the declaration that we are going to have in Vancouver. It is going to be sometime after June, in the beginning of July. I think we should really keep the connection with the speakers that we had here, but also with Ambassador Brandt to see where we stand in the process, so that in the supplementary item, when we actually formulate our recommendations, that it's really very good connected to the process. and where we stand in the process, and how could we really make recommendations that could strengthen the process. I think this is really very, very important. And the third thing is, again, going back to our young parliamentarians. I mean, I was really happy to see all you here, and again, good to that network becomes also more active on this future generation debate. And we have to see what can we do, let's say, organizing side events or something else together with the network of young parliamentarians, so that we can really increase the awareness about this conversation on the Declaration of Future Generation going on. So, Manu Chair, there has been some links provided by our speakers. I think we can provide that also to everybody, because the moment that we actually log off from this Zoom, then we have no access to those links. So it would be good if you could distribute that to everybody. So thank you very much, everybody, for participation. Thank you, Margareta. Thank you, Roberto, for being here during the whole meeting. And Jacob and Thomas, thank you very much. I mean, it was really valuable, very, very much appreciated your contribution. And I really stay in touch with you on, the next steps of this process. And I have to say, I am nowhere without Manu Chair. So Manu Chair, thank you very much. So really deep thank you for all the work that you do. I think it's just amazing to see how you really do everything, more or less. And thank you very much. Thank you. So have a good day. And we will continue the conversation in a different possible location or meeting or so on. So thank you very much.
Well done, Manu Chair.